Hello and thank you for joining us at lunchlesson.com for another small lunch lesson regarding core values that can be used in any business. We use the acronym CCEDIT to represent these 6 core values that are essential for the success of any business. Please enjoy the course. Alright, so a quick overview. We're going to cover the 6 core values, giving definition and my paraphrased definition. And then we'll finish up with one core value that would ensure that you're following the other 6. Alright, so let's begin by going into the first of 6 core values, and we'll go through each one in turn with a small description of each one. So beginning right off, we have communication, then critical thinking, ethics, diversity, inquiry, and finally teamwork. There's where the CCEDIT comes from, and I credit that to one of my students at a college in Ohio. And should by any freak of nature she happen to take this course, please contact me and give me your name so that I can credit you by name. This was actually a very swift turning point in the way these were presented in all my classes. Alright, so moving on, we will get into the first one, communications. So beginning with communications, we go through the definition, which is a skill basic to all of us, involves listening, speaking, and writing for the purpose of understanding and being understood. A lifetime learning process. Communication involves the ability to use appropriate, reasonable language or dialects and to address diverse audiences. That says an awful lot. It's kind of verbose. And what I like to point out is that communications is two-way and asynchronous. That's a geeky term, which means it occurs simultaneously. Transmit, receive, receive, transmit. My line's cut off here on the slide a little bit. But that's what it's about, literally. You're either transmitting or receiving information. And if you do it at the same time, speaking, listening at the same time, then you're more willing to be open to new ideas from other people. And it looks like one line got cut off here. With communication, seek first to understand, then to be understood. That might actually come up here in just a moment because it was a quote. Use all 5 levels of meaning if possible. In other words, use enough descriptive words to hit pretty much everybody in the audience. You want to, a principle of teaching is you want to present things 9 times 9 ways. Try to hit as many of those as possible through your communication. And that would be one of the reasons why lunch lessons are actually presented in formats conducive to auditory, visual, and kinesthetic learning. We're trying to hit as many of these levels as possible. There it is. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. That was actually presented by Stephen Covey, author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's a very good principle. If you focus, if you do nothing other than change your focus to this one option, which is seek first to understand other people, then to be understood, then you will spend more time trying to make sure that you understand what's going on and what other people are communicating to you. And that will actually improve your communication because you'll be able to address the things that are of concern to them. Alright, then we'll move on here and we'll get into our next core value. Okay, so what could come after communications? Critical thinking. With critical thinking, the definition that I received at the college in Ohio was the ability to think with dimension. Thinking becomes the ability to apply internalized standards of thought, clarity, relevance, analysis, organization, recognition, evaluation, accuracy, depth, and breadth. Critical thinking requires detachment, the ability to examine critically one's own ideas and thoughts as well as examining the ideas and thoughts of others. Possessing the fundamentals of critical thinking enables an individual to reason across a variety of disciplines and domains to critique one's own thinking from many perspectives. To me, this actually bleeds into a couple of other of the core values. Critical thinking, pure and simple. You can see the continuation here. Development and use of critical thinking is a lifelong activity that enables us to continually improve our thought and the consequent products of our thought in our lives and society. Okay, that's a lot of blah 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 to me. When I paraphrase critical thinking, it always comes down to what I've seen over and over again. Don't hand your life over to the quote-unquote experts. People take their car to the dealer, they take their car to the shop and the repairman, and they let them run wild with it. They don't understand enough about the operation of their own vehicle to critically analyze everything that somebody says about their vehicle. I actually have a very humorous recording along those lines, and I'll be glad to share that in valuable resources. And it is funny, but it is sad at the same time. Regardless, doctors now mark with a marker, or they actually have the patient mark with a permanent ink marker which limb is to be amputated during amputations. That alone would be the reason to think critically and not hand your life over to the experts. I made the mistake once of handing my life over to an expert, put it in her hands with regard to buying a new home, and she made the mistake of not including a very standard, very basic thing in the closing agreement, which was basically, instead of a 30-day occupancy, which is very much the norm, she had same day as close for occupancy. Now, if you've ever sold and bought a property at the same time, the way it works is you schedule the buying of the new one after the selling of the old one. When you sell the old one, you take your check over to the buying and you go to that closing. And the closing takes a while because there's a lot of paperwork, a lot of checks being written and handed to different people. Well, by missing that 30-day window, what it meant was the new owner of my old place, before I owned my new place, was going to show up at my old place right after the closing. She wanted to drive straight from the closing to the new place and move all her stuff in, which meant that I had the amount of time it took for us to drive home and her to drive to our home to get everything backed up, moved into the new place after closing the new place. Lucky for us, the owners of the new place were amenable, since it was vacant, to let us bring some stuff over ahead of time, and we pretty much moved everything. Alright? Don't hand your life over to the experts. If you do it once, let's hope it wasn't anything too serious. Alright, then we'll move on to the next core value here after critical thinking. So if you remember, it's CCEDIT. We're up to E. The E stands for ethics. And ethics is interesting considering the class that I was teaching these core values in was business related. And let me tell you, if there is ever an ethical issue, it would be with business. Ethics, here's the definition. The ethics core values define in terms of decision making. A distinction is made between values and ethics. Values are either good or bad. Ethics either exist or don't exist. They are decisions and behaviors that are based on values. Thus, you will, whenever appropriate, endeavor to present material in a manner that will cause students to consider the decision-making process in terms of ethics. Okay, that's what was given to us instructors. Here's the way I paraphrase it. Ethics is always determined, your ethics, your personal ethics, are always determined by your personal situation, which is constantly in change. Alright? Your personal situation is always in flux. So from one minute to the next, your ethics will change. Now, when it comes to ethics, you honestly cannot hold anyone else accountable for your ethics. And you cannot even guess why somebody else's ethics are the way they are. The example I like, there's two of them. One again goes back to Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. In that book, he relates the story of sitting on a train in a very public place in a large city, and a gentleman gets on the train with 2 children. They're running around the instant they get on the train, running up and down the car, knocking people down, running into things. Uh, it eventually reaches a fevered pitch, and since the gentleman sat next to Stephen Covey, everybody on the car is kind of like looking at him like, aren't you going to say something to this guy? And so it's his responsibility now, apparently, to confront this guy about the fact that his children have reached this fevered pitch of misbehaving and are knocking newspapers out of people's hands and spilling people's coffee and all kinds of crazy things. Anyway, when he does confront the individual, the guy kind of is like in a daze, and he pops out of it, kind of looks around, looks at the situation, and kind of groggily says, "Oh, yeah, I guess they are kind of misbehaving. You see, we just came from the hospital where their mother just died, and I guess they just don't know how to deal with it, and honestly, neither do I." That little anecdote and that little statement that gentleman relays immediately shifts everyone's perspective. Now, one of my huge pet peeves is children that misbehave because their parents don't do anything about it. If I were not holding to my definition of true ethics and ethical behavior, I would accuse that guy of being a bad parent. But since I don't know his personal situation, I can't make that determination. It's not up to me to decide if he's a good or bad parent. That will reveal itself in time if you care enough. If you don't care enough to get into somebody else's life and know every aspect of their life, then you're much better off just not paying enough attention in the first place. So, that right there is one of the best examples of how people can be a situational jerk. I read a book a long time ago called Working with Jerks, and the woman who wrote it, who also read it, explained through the book, pretty much through the whole thing, it always came down to the fact that there are all these different kinds of jerks, but the most important one to remember was situational jerk, which means every one of us at some point in our lives will act like a jerk based off of our situation. So, based off of our situation, for a momentary point of time, we might be looked at as though we were a jerk. That's what happened to that gentleman on the train, and that's what happens with the guy in the little red sports car that cuts you off on the highway. You honestly have no idea what is going on in that guy's world when you get cut off on the highway. If a guy in a little sports car cuts you off on the highway, if you chase them down or try to do anything crazy with road rage, you might, just might, be interfering with somebody who's trying to get to the hospital because their child is dying. You might, just might, be getting in the way of a gentleman who is a fireman who's racing to the fire station in his personal vehicle so that he can change into his gear and get to your house to save your children. Do not try to guess other people's personal situations, and even if you could, it is constantly changing, just like your own. And be aware of the fact that sometimes you are the jerk. In that book, she actually finishes up by saying, if you have done everything I say in this book, and you look around, and everybody that surrounds you, everyone you run into, is a jerk, guess what?